It's Christmas in July and time for a new Cinema 4D release, and this one is unlike any other release before. Let's check it out. In this video, I'm going to be covering some of the most notable new features added to Cinema 4D R21, as well as some of my favorite aspects of those big new features. Now, if you want to follow along, be sure to download some of the project files, and you can find that link in this video description. All right, so let's actually hop into Cinema 4D and see what has changed within the app. And once you launch Cinema 4D, you're going to be greeted with this new quick start dialog that is kind of Maxons' answer to the quick start dialogues in Adobe products. So like After Effects, Photoshop, you get that launch screen, and you're going to see that we have the recent files that we have here that you can select. There's also templates that will be populated as this gets updated. And you're also gonna have this new file button and open button right in this little quick start dialog. Another cool thing is that you're gonna have a list of updated Cineversity tutorials that you can check out and get familiar with, as well as spotlighted series like this one from yours truly that is all about injecting character into objects using just deformers. Now, this is always going to be updating, so it's always going to be a fun little surprise each time you launch Cinema 4D to see what tutorial content's going to be here. So really cool stuff. But once you close out of that quick start dialog, you can then feast your eyes on the updated UI and interface. First thing you're going to notice is that everything is slightly darker. And this is to help with contrast and to make this interface a little bit easier on the eyes. You're going to notice that this is the same kind of darker gray that was added to Adobe products when it launched to Creative Cloud. So we've got that really nice, darker, slick UI. Another big improvement is all of the icons are much crisper. And this is because with R21, there's new high-res display support. Okay, so that means that this is going to be looking really nice and snazzy on HD monitors. Okay, so another thing you'll notice is that some of the icons are a little bit different or have been updated. A lot of the menus have been switched around. Now, I'm actually in the old school menu, but if I go back to the Cinema 4D menu, you can see that things are kind of grouped differently. Okay, now if you're not quite happy with all of the new groupings, and a lot of this is actually pretty intuitive, the new way all these menus are grouped, you can always go back to the old way by going to the Cinema 4D Legacy menu, and that'll bring everything back to how everything was laid out before, at least in this top bar menu. Now, another thing you're going to notice is that we have a whole bunch of new icons up here, and actually reorganized icons as well. Let me just start from the left and move to the right. One of the things that I think is going to be a huge help is the docked reset PSR button. So if I move anything in my scene and I just want to reset the position, scale, and rotation coordinates, so let me just rotate this and click that reset PSR, bam, it's going to reset all of my coordinates back to their defaults. And this is just going to be a really handy thing to have docked. I would always dock this manually, but it's great to have this docked already. So, because I use this button all the time. So let's move on to the right. You can see these new render icons looking pretty snazzy. Our primitives box, everything is pretty much the same here. But as we move down and dig into these menus, you can see in the spline menu, there are these new spline, subtract, and all these Boolean commands that you can just select two splines and execute one of these. So this is a bunch of new features in the spline menu. You can see that we have a different grouping of objects in this generator menu here. Okay, so this is all different. And we have our extrudes in their own menu too. And then we have this whole menu for cloner objects and MoGraph objects. We have Voronoi fracture in here, and we even have our effectors in this menu as well. There's a new volume button that has all the volume builder, volume mesher, all this stuff here, fog smoothers, vector smoothers, all these new kind of things in this new button. So there's been enough updates to the volume system that it deserves its own button. And speaking of deserving its own button is the whole fields list here. So all the field objects now has its own designated button. And here we have our deformers menu, which is pretty much the same kind of layout and in the same position as it is in older versions of Cinema 4D. Again, nothing's changed with the floor or the cameras or the lights really. So that's it for this top bar. Another thing you're gonna notice as far as the layout is if you right click on anything, tags are going to be grouped again in a different way, but way more intuitively, okay? So new groupings, but everything makes sense in where everything is grouped together. So we have render tags, and that's where you'll find your compositing tag and display tags and external compositing tag. You don't have to dig through that old Cinema 4D tags and keep scrolling down and trying to find things. So I really dig that new layout. And again, I dig the new layout of that top bar menu as well. So that's the interface. Let's move on to some features. So the first big feature that I'm gonna cover is Caps and Bevels, and this kind of really changes the way that you work with not only MoText, but any object that allows you to use caps. So not only MoText, but an extrude object, a loft, a sweep, anything like that, anything that has this caps option, okay? So the most obvious choice is to just jump into our MoText object here. And if you're like me, early on in my career, I worked with a lot of 3D type. And one of the hardest things to do is to create chiseled type or get really nice bevels on your text. Well, with Cinema 4D R20's Caps and Bevels, you can create chiseled text by simply moving a slider and bam, we have chiseled text, okay? This is incredible. This is something that I wish was in Cinema 4D a long time ago. We have the ability to adjust the sharpness of that chisel, or if we just want like a nice little bevel there. But one of the main problems with bevels in previous versions was if you made that bevel size too large, you'd get really janky edges. And when I say really janky edges, let me show you what those janky edges looked like. If we check off this avoid self-intersections, there's that jankiness right there. So this new way that Cinema 4D R21 calculates bevels is way more powerful and way nicer than in the past. There's this whole new set of possibilities now with creating 3D type and just modeling in general, modeling shapes, again, with extrudes and sweeps and all that good stuff. One of the really cool features is the ability to load bevel presets. So we can have this whole stepped option here. And what this is going to bring up is this curve editor. And this allows you to really fine tune exactly what your bevel profile shape looks like. Okay, so you can get really in there, get some really nice intricate beveling on your 3D type or whatever objects that have caps that you're then adjusting. So really great stuff. And I'm actually going to cover this feature in more depth in its own standalone tutorial, so be sure to check that out because there's a lot here that is very handy to use. One of the other things that's really nice is when you were dealing with materials. So say I have a new material here. Let's maybe make this like purple or something like that. And I want to apply that just to the cap. So what you would do in the past is you add on that material. You'd have to remember what that selection tag name was. So like C1 for the front cap. Well, you don't have to memorize what you need to put in here anymore because with Cinema 4D R21, if you go to the selection tab here, we can actually check on whatever option or polygon selection that you want, even edge selections, and this will then, if I go and say the start cap there, it's going to create a tag here, and we'll just simply drag and drop that tag into that selection, and there we go. So no longer needing to memorize anything. Let's maybe do the start bevel. You can see that the start bevel is R1. We'll just drag and drop that in there, and there you see we just have that purple material on just that front rounding. So really handy kind of quality of life improvements as far as polygon selection and edge selections go. So Caps and Bevels, been a long time coming, finally gets an update. I love it. Hopefully you'll enjoy it as well. Now onto a relatively smaller feature, but a quality of life enhancer for sure, is the new Project Asset Inspector. Now what the Project Asset Inspector does is replaces the old texture manager, because it's not just limited to just textures. We now see all of the assets in our scene, whether it be GI files or WAV files, like any audio files we're using in our project file, and of course, any image files we have as well. So this is your one-stop shop for managing all of the assets in your project. So one of the best things about this new way to manage all of your project assets is we can now go into our preferences here, and for our files we can actually go ahead and change link assets to project to use the absolute path. So what this means is now you don't have to create those texture folders or those little TEX folders for every single project that you're working on. You can actually work in a way more efficient way, and your Cinema 4D file isn't going to look for that TEX folder every single time. So huge quality of life improvement there. Now, if you are a character animator or anyone who uses Mixamo and brings in that Mixamo mocap animation and applies it to any characters in Cinema 4D, R21 has a great new feature called the Mixamo control rig. And what it actually does is allows you to use this Mixamo control rig that's built into the character object and allows you to set up that character object to link to your Mixamo mocap rig, and you're able to kind of adjust and animate on top of your Mixamo control rig. So before, you had to manually set up all of these little controllers, just like this spine controller here. And if you want to adjust the head, you'd have to set that up too. And now you can just easily animate this head kind of bobbing like that if you wanted to. So it gives you this whole nother layer of control over your Mixamo rig. So very powerful stuff. Something else as we're talking about characters and all that good stuff is in R21, they improved their auto weighting algorithm that will allow you to save time not having to go back and maybe softening up or repainting some of the janky results you might have gotten in the old auto weighting features in older versions of Cinema 4D. Another great feature is how you can actually cache specific layers. So a cache layer will work as like an adjustment layer in After Effects or Photoshop, where it'll cache everything underneath. And what that means is that you can bake out or cache some of your geometry and be able to freely, adjust something like this random field here without it needing to recalculate everything. So I can go ahead and move this random field up a little bit, and it's taking a little bit to calculate, but it's a lot faster than it would have been had it had to calculate everything underneath this cache layer. As you can see, I have quite a bit here. And one last thing that's a really cool update is the ability to create a curvature map off of your volume mesher. So that'll create a vertex map, and you can use this for things like grunge maps or dirt maps that you can do and use with materials. Another really nice addition to Cinema 4D R21 is the new Intel Open Image Denoiser that is actually a post effect. So basically the good use case for this is if you're just kind of concepting, you need to throw out a bunch of images or an animation, give it to a client. You can see that this is a very quick render. It's only 21 seconds, but it is grainy as all get out. Now, what you'd want to do is not send a client this and have the client ask all kind of questions like, why does this look so cruddy? What we could do is go to our render settings, go to our post effects, and right here we have the new denoiser, okay? So let's go ahead and render this again and see what this will look like after that denoiser is then applied. Now, it is a post effect, so you're not actually going to see the effect until after this image is done doing its rendering and all these buckets are going to be finished. But you can see that adding this denoiser effect will not actually add that much time to our overall render. So we had 21 seconds. Boom! Look at that. That added a single second, and look how much nicer and smooth this looks like. Let's go back to our original grainy render, and this is our denoised soda can. We are living in the future, ladies and gentlemen. Check that out. That's just really, really cool. And this is good enough to, send to a client. They don't have to worry about the graininess or anything like that. And we're not jeopardizing all of our render time. So one giant feature that was added to R20 was volume modeling, and in R21 it gets a much needed feature, and that is the ability to cache your volume builder, and that includes even animation. So we have this brand new cache layer. You can cache animation. So I have this oozy text that really played back very slowly in my viewport. You cache that whole entire animation, and voila, you now have the ability to easily scrub in your timeline and actually see your cached volume animation. Caching was something that you wouldn't be able to do before. You would have to bake out as a limbic. So this new cache layer is a massive update to the volume modeling workflow. So let's jump into our Cinema 4D node system here. You'll notice that the interface has kind of been revamped a little bit. Looks nice. It's very snappy, very snazzy looking. And one thing that's going to be really cool as far as the future of the node system in Cinema 4D is that it's going to allow for multiple render engines, including third-party engines, to use Cinema 4D node systems. So specifically, Redshift got acquired by Maxons. It's going to be very interesting to see how integrated Redshift and the Cinema 4D native nodes kind of coexist and intertwine there. So that could be very cool in the future. And one of the big things to the node system is the arbitrary AOVs that have been added. Now, you might be wondering, what the heck is an AOV? Basically, what an AOV is like an object buffer for any aspect of a material. So let's just say we have our little, let's just get this little material here. It's like a gold flake material, as you can see, applied on my little plus sign there. I just have some noise, and it's overlaid onto a diffuse, and that's creating our little nice gold flake material, okay? So what if I wanted to just render out the gold flakes generated by the noise as a separate pass, as an object buffer? Well, that's where the AOV comes into play. So what I can do is go to my inputs tab here on my main material, go to this AOV multipasses and click add. And what this will allow me to do is to plug in the result of my noise that has an alpha added, basically, or we're controlling the opacity there. Plug that into my color, and I can render this out as its own separate pass. You can see that the AOV ID is 1. It works just like the object buffer system. And then I can just click add to render settings, and I'll go to my render settings here. You'll see there's my AOV, again, added just like an object buffer, and it's set to 1. And what I can now do is just render this to picture viewer. And what you'll see as this renders out our scene, you'll find in the actual layer tab here, we have this single pass, and we can actually see what that AOV looks like. So let's go back to image. This is going to slowly render on my trash can Mac Pro here. And if I go to single pass now, check that out. We have an object buffer for just that gold flake noise on my material here, which is really, really cool. So now we can go ahead, composite this, add color correction to just that isolated noise. And again, AOVs add that extra layer of control, allowing you to composite your materials in a very streamlined and logical way. The same way you can layer up different object buffers in After Effects or Photoshop. You can do the same thing with different aspects, different layers of textures on a single material using this new AOV system in Cinema 4D R21. With Cinema 4D R21, Maxons is aiming to make 3D accessible for the whole world with their new licensing and inexpensive subscription model pricing. And that alone is the big show stealer. So this is kind of the biggest quote unquote feature, and it's the subscription model. So basically what this does is it breaks down that initial barrier of that high price tag for that full version of Cinema 4D, which was about $3,500. And now you can get this annual subscription, which is billed annually, but it breaks down to about $59.99 a month. So the other thing to mention is that there is no longer all these separate versions of Cinema 4D like Broadcast or Studio, where Broadcast only has some features, and if you want all the features, you got to grab Studio. It's none of that anymore. Everything is the Studio version. You get all the features when you buy Cinema 4D, so that's a great thing as well. Now, with the annual subscription, you can also get Redshift bundled in there, and you'll see this updated price of $81.99. Again, billed annually, so you'll pay that up front and you'll get that full year of that subscription. Now you can also buy just a single month subscription here, and you can see the price here is $94.99. And if you want just a single month with Cinema 4D and Redshift, you can see that that is $116.99, and that's again billed monthly. Now a lot of you may be thinking, well, I don't want to commit to a subscription. I just want to own something, because I think we all had that feeling when Adobe went to subscription. We still wanted that one copy that we wanted to always own and not have to worry about updating or subscribing to anything. Well, at least for now, you can do that and just buy that perpetual license that you own forever, never expires. It's Cinema 4D R21, and you'll be billed that original price tag of the old studio versions, which is that $3,495. So if you just want to straight up buy R21, you can do that, and you don't have to be locked into a subscription or anything like that. So a lot of flexibility. Who knows how long they'll keep this perpetual license here. So if you're on the fence, you just want to straight up buy R21, now's the time to kind of get that going. So that is the new subscription and licensing. Again, the licensing is a much more streamlined system. You don't have to wait for codes or anything like that, or a physical copy. They're not shipping physical copies. It's all online. You get your copy activated. You just log into your Maxon account and fire up your version of Cinema 4D, which is really cool. In C4D R21, the whole subfield system has been updated to make it more intuitive. Now here's an example of a way I would typically use a subfield, and that is using a freeze layer. And one thing you can modify is the radius of that freeze layer, say by using freeze layer growth. Now to add a subfield, you need to dig into a menu, add that random field, and all of those random settings would be deep inside that whole tab system, and it's kind of laborious to keep going back and forth through those hidden settings. But now in Cinema 4D R21, you can see that the subfield, if a field layer has a subfield option, like this freeze layer here, you can see it's represented as a child folder. And you can see this radius here. What we can do is just simply add a random field, place it in that radius folder, and you can see that you no longer have to dig through menus or anything like that. You can actually just access that random subfield in the normal fall off tab menu there. So we can go ahead, adjust that radius, and now we can have more organic freeze layer growth, which is really, really awesome. Another fun addition to the field layer system is the ability to use field masks. So typically before, you were just limited to using different blending modes to add or subtract effects or mask them off. In R21, you have the ability to select a field, like a random field, create a mask, and use another field to mask that effect of that parent field, which is really cool. So here I have a spherical field masking the effect of that random field to wherever that spherical field is. So it's just an added layer of functionality to your field layer list, where you can utilize these field masks to work just like layer masks in Photoshop or After Effects. One deep new feature that was added in Cinema 4D R21 was field forces. Now, you may be familiar with your old particle forces, your attractor, deflector, all that good stuff, but the field force is all of these forces kind of combined into one, and allows you to use fields to affect particles as well as any dynamic objects. It's this whole new way to manipulate particles and anything that you can apply dynamics to. So we're even talking about cloth engine here. So it's very, very powerful. It's very deep. It's also something I'm going to be covering in its own very own tutorial. So be sure to check that out. But one of the things I'm most excited about, in addition to the particles, I'm self-admittedly not a big particle guy, is just the ability to affect dynamics in a whole new way. So one of the things that I always like to try to do was use particle forces with dynamic objects. So here I have a very simple scene, and this is a workflow that I always like to do, is having some dynamic objects be attracted and kind of cling to another object. So you can see I have this attractor set to this plus sign. It's just made a child of it. And you can see that the problem with using an attractor is, even if you're using a fall off shape that is actually the volume of the object, it's always going to attract to that axis center. You can see all of these spheres just kind of hovering around here. Now with field forces, you can actually visualize what the particle force or the dynamic force direction is. You can see if we use this object, this plus sign, as a field force volume, we're actually going to attract to this actual surface. And you can see all these little vector lines. Basically, vectors are the direction in which that force is pulling. And you can see all these lines pointing not to the axis center of our object, but to the actual surface. You can see vector lines pointing here. And if I go ahead and hit play, I have this rotating little plus sign, and you can see all of these vectors kind of updating. You can see that my spheres are not being attracted to the center of the object, but just the surface of the overall object, the actual volume of the object. And this was previously not able to be utilized in older versions of Cinema 4D. So you can now take into account the actual surface of a volume to have particles fly across it, or in our case right here, have dynamic objects kind of cling to that overall surface of that volume. Now, while I might not be saving the absolute best for last, I think it's part of the best thing that is happening to Cinema 4D as it's being updated here. If you weren't aware, the team at Maxons is actually slowly rewriting the core code of Cinema 4D. So eventually everything's going to be much faster. Everything's going to be multi-threaded and all that good stuff. Now, the fruits of that labor in this version is the fact that the timeline threading is much better. So now when you have the timeline open, you're not going to lose any speed in your viewport. Now, in previous versions, you could have a bunch of keyframes in your timeline, and that would actually affect your viewport playback. So again, it's not the best feature, but it is part of this major arcing work that's being done to Cinema 4D, and you're going to slowly see, again, the fruits of that labor, or the mushrooms of that labor, I guess, I don't know. As the versions progress, we should be seeing a much snappier viewport and much snappier features overall. Now, we've only just scratched the surface on all of the new features that have been added to Cinema 4D R21. Now, if you want to know about all of the features that have been added to R21, be sure to check out the article that's in the description of this video, where we're going to have a bunch of handy links to Maxons' site that lists all of the new features, as well as more information about the new subscription tier pricing. It's such an exciting time to be getting into Cinema 4D now that that cost barrier has been lowered with that new subscription model. Now, we're going to have a lot more in-depth training on some of the R21 features that I think are going to be really important. We're talking about caps and bevels, field forces, and the Mixamo control rig, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Now, if you want to keep up with all the latest 3D and MoGraph industry news, be sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.